Hi everyone, we've just gone live. This is a webinar all about cookie compliance, which I know everyone has been dying. They were like, once the World Cup's out of the way, let's watch a webinar about cookie compliance. So first of all, let me introduce everyone on the panel. In fact, let's start with you, Tom. A little introduction, please.
Oh, hello. I am Tom. I am a partner at Scown. I work in the intellectual property team. And yes, unfortunately, cookies are something that I have spent a lot of time dealing with. It looks like I spent a lot of time eating them, but unfortunately, it's mostly litigious work around cookies that I have to get involved with.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And we've known each other a long time because I think Ben in your team and you have been doing our terms and conditions since the dawn of time. So thank you so much for the support that you give us and for giving up your time today to talk to our clients about this. Michael, do you want to do a brief introduction?
Oh yeah, go for it. I'm Michael. I'm the data strategist here at Launch Online. And for the past few months, I've been making sure our clients get all compliant by giving them a cookie management system and very much showing them how to use it.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jay. I'm the founder of Launch Online. We're doing a series of webinars. We've been doing some with Shopify. Our next one with Shopify is coming up, all about influencer marketing. But the point of today is something that's really what has been on the agenda for a good few years now, is all about making sure that your compliance, that your data hygiene is in good order. And the more online advertising we do, the more important it is that we give your users the option to choose what privacy setting they have when they come through to your website. So this today is kind of an all-in-one introduction to what a cookie is, why it's important to be compliant, and why it's important to do it without losing loads of your data, because that's how your advertising can be optimized. So question number one, what is a cookie? And Michael, I'm going to come to you first on that. Oh, and he's going to sneeze.
Sneeze. That's a really bad time to have a sneeze, isn't it? I think it's gone away.
Michael.
Thank you. So what is a cookie? In a nutshell, if you think about when the internet was first created and let loose upon the world, it was very simple. So if you were a user, you'd go to a website and that web server would only be dealing with things in real time. It would have no way of identifying who you are. But of course, as we know, the internet now is very technical. You can do lots of things. You can do shopping, online banking, all of this sort of thing, social media even. Lots of things more technical than it was originally designed for. So in order for a web server to identify who you are and what you've done on a website, it will send just a small text file called a cookie to your browser, and then that is stored on your browser. So the next time you come back to a website, it knows exactly who you are.
A brilliant explanation. I think my favorite explanation, though, is Tom's explanation when we first started preparing for this webinar. Tom, what was your version of what is a cookie?
It's a little bit less technically accurate. I'll just caveat this, because as a lawyer, I have to caveat this. Not necessarily a true story, not necessarily fact. But it's apparently, so I've been told in the pub, to do with Hansel and Gretel, who famously travelled into the woods, and I think in the original fairy tale were cooked, but travelled into the woods in order to retrace their steps, left a trail of breadcrumbs behind, and the breadcrumbs allowed them to identify where they had been and where they had not. And such as it is for you and your internet-enabled device, you leave a trail of breadcrumbs behind, being these digital cookie files that Michael alluded to, made of text and other information. And that information allows you to know, or rather your device to know, whether you've been to a website before, so you really do want to buy those Jimmy Choos at 5% off, or whether you're the first time visitor to the Jimmy Choos website and you're going to get 10% off because you've never been there before. So that's what I've been told, which is sometimes an easier explanation to give to people because they might not be technically advanced. But at the same time, I thought Michael's explanation was actually really very good. So you can ignore mine.
It seems we've lost our host. Oh, she's back. That was a close one.
I don't quite know what happened there, but did you get to tell your story about
did.
the cookies being lost in the woods?
And I was about to move on and do my own questions, and then you came back, Jay. So that's probably best for everybody.
So, Tom, first question. Lots of the businesses are currently not compliant or not sure why they should be kind of implementing compliance measures. In fact, as soon as I say the word compliance, I can see some of them switch off. What is it that we mean by compliance with regards to data and cookies, and who does it affect? Okay,
well, this is quite an easy question to answer in some respects. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. Compliance is not a sexy word, is it? Nobody goes, yeah, I'm a compliance guru, and everybody goes swoon. But it is important. It is absolutely vital for businesses. Who does it affect? It affects every website. I've never come across, actually, that's not entirely true. I did once come across a website which did not feature cookies, except it had been built, I think, on an Amstrad or a Commodore, and it had been, I mean, it was green screen stuff. It was very, very basic. And they had no data was captured because there was no opportunity to capture data. But every website has cookies on it. It might have first or third party cookies. And Michael's going to delve into the types of cookies and all that, how it works, the practicalities and technicalities of it. But broadly speaking, it affects everybody. Why is this important? Without wishing to sound like a lawyer, because it's the law. And why are people not compliant? Well, a couple of reasons. Reason one is being the law and being multifaceted, it is incredibly complex. Even the Information Commissioner's Office, who are the people who govern the law in the UK around cookies, had to fine themselves when they realised they'd got it wrong. And it was their own cookie notice that they'd got wrong. So it's not straightforward. It's not always clear. It's very sort of murky because it's built out of a number of different bits of legislation I shall not bore you with. However, it is also incredibly tedious. Not only is compliance tedious by its name and tedious by its nature, but it also is tedious for people at the other end of it. So as an end user landing on a website, what you're usually after, you're usually after is the website. You're not visiting a website so that you can read the cookie notice. A number of sites have gone down, and progressively so, I think more and more are going down what's called a shrink wrap approach, where you can't access the website content until you've gone through a very granular and detailed privacy policy or cookie policy with an acceptance mechanism, or there's multiple acceptance mechanisms, and the consumer journey is jarred. So why would you prohibit people from being able to access your website when quite often your website is a source of business, if not your source of business? Why would you do it? Why would you strangle yourself? You wouldn't. Given that there isn't a huge amount of high profile enforcement, given that there is lots of varied approaches to cookie compliance on the websites at the moment, and you can see that. I mean, if you visit, for example, the BBC News website, and then you visit something like Jamie Oliver's website, and then have a look at the Information Commissioner's Office's website, have a look at anything that's run by the Daily Mail and Reach Group. I mean, don't, because obviously might be miseducated, but you do get a different impression of what, and for legal reasons, other websites are available with different varying levels of quality of news. But if you go and look at those websites, you'll notice that they're all dealing with cookies in a slightly different way. And none of them are truly 100% compliant, because that is the difficult nirvana to achieve. I think I have to probably say to everybody right now, you're never going to be fully compliant because it would involve doing no trade and doing nothing. But what you can do is you can be more compliant than your neighbour, and they're more likely to get fined.
So what is an individual's business? Well, a business's obligation. What is their obligation to do when a user visits their website?
So, broadly speaking, a cookie is personal data. There's times when it isn't, and Michael can drill down on some of the detail of when it isn't personal data. But if it is personal data, and a website being operated by a business is collecting that personal data, then that business has to comply with the laws around personal data. So where you capture personal data, you have to have a valid lawful basis for taking that data. And sometimes you can rely on what's called a legitimate interest, and sometimes you can rely on consent. And consent is often deemed as king because it's the easiest, it's the most obvious form of evidenceable valid lawful basis you can have, because somebody's actually said, yes, please, I want you to have my data. And by and large, cookies are in that camp. They are a consent-based piece of personal data, which you are saying to a website, yes, you can have my personal data. So a website has to ask for consent. That's sort of the biggest hurdle. The difficulty, of course, is that you're probably, as a website, capturing different type of personal data to another website. So some people take a one-glove-fits-all approach. That doesn't always work. And there are circumstances when you're not collecting personal data through a cookie, or your cookie is not called a cookie, it's called a pixel. Again, Michael can expand on some of the detail there, but broadly speaking, it's a consent-based mechanism. You land on the website's trying to take data from you. You need to give consent for it to happen. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, and you need to explain to people what you're doing. That's the biggest hurdle as well, because people are never going to read it, but it needs to be there so that when somebody finally does inspect it, being the Information Commissioner's Office, or as we've discovered more recently, disgruntled customers or former employees who will shop you in very quickly if you're not compliant, they need to be able to see it and understand it and say, yeah, this is why I'm giving you my location, or how many other trouser websites I've visited, or whatever it is.
And what's the consequence if they're not doing it compliantly? What happens?
So there's probably two immediate obvious things that happen. Thing one is you look out of sorts in the marketplace. So if you're operating, and I'm picking on e-commerce because consumers are relatively savvy nowadays, and if you go on to Boohoo or ASOS or River Island, again, other fashion brands are available at a different price point. You look at those websites, and they are all trying to capture your data for the same purpose. If you all of a sudden, as one of those online retailers, aren't showing people a cookie notice, you are going to look like you're not compliant, even if you are for whatever reason, and you need to keep up with the marketplace. So you're going to distance yourselves from your competition, probably in a negative way, especially in an e-commerce world, because your consumers are going to be thinking, hang on a second, are they really keeping my credit card details secure? Of course, I'm related to cookies, but it looks and feels the same. It's a personal data security point. If they're not treating cookies seriously, are they treating the rest of my personal data seriously? The second and more legally obvious issue is fines. Lots and lots of fines, and the Information Commissioner's Office need to make money. It's a relatively easy enforcement job. Go on your website, you haven't got a cookie notice that's compliant, fine you. It's not a huge amount of money, I should point out. I say huge amount of money. This is, depends on how much money you've got in the bank, doesn't it? If £5 could be a lot of money. It's about £2,500 to £6,000. So enough to buy a nice small car or a lovely holiday. I know I sound like I'm on a game show, but all these things obviously add up, don't they? So if you're receiving a fine from the Information Commissioner's Office, you're looking like you're out of sorts with your competition in the marketplace. Invariably, if you receive a fine, you're probably also going to end up being spiked on the insurance policy. Things could spiral if you had a particularly aggressive individual who wanted to take action against you, shopped you into the ICO, and then wanted to take umbrage at further other issues. And I suppose they could probably make a real pain for themselves in publicity land as well.
And are people being fined? Have they started?
Oh, yes. Yes, all the time. Yes, it's a brilliant form of revenue. It's like speeding. Everybody does it. We'll catch you eventually. Thank you very much. The Information Commissioner's Office were going to employ bots, which is a bit of an end of world Terminator 2 style sort of situation where Skynet takes over and everybody starts governing. Sorry, I'm talking completely in geek, by the way. Michael understands quite fine. Skynet style enforcement regime. In reality, they are using a little bit of AI, but not very much. But where they come across a website that isn't compliant, or worst case scenario, your business has suffered some sort of data protection breach, which is unrelated to cookies entirely, not impossible, unfortunately quite common. It's just the cherry on top. If you are the investigating officer of the Information Commissioner's Office, you go to your investigative website to see what that person's up to, and all of a sudden they haven't got a cookie notice, they haven't dealt with cookies properly, you're going to be thinking, I'm not sure these guys really know what they're doing. So it can be a useful tool to mitigate risk, if nothing else.
And how does a business become compliant then? What do they have to do to become compliant? So
it's in this case, it's about spending less money than you would be spent on a fine. So sometimes compliance costs more than a fine, and Microsoft made a very good habit out of spending less on fines than they would have done on proper servers throughout the mid-2000s. Again, other service providers are available. In this case, it's not that complex. So you will need to have a notice that tells people that cookies are active on the website. The level of detail in that notice will depend on the type of cookies that you have active and how clear you want to be with your customer base. Some of those examples I cited earlier have got all different methods of trying to draw you down into complying to multiple cookies or not. There invariably will be a time when the Information Commissioner's Office say, no, you can't do that anymore. So there is an element of making hay while the sun shines and just having a consent mechanism which drives the users to say yes to everything. There is a phrase for it which I still can't remember, despite having rehearsed this with you before, Jay. But Amazon are guilty of it, and I think it was the Danish courts or the Norwegian courts who said Amazon are a typical offender of this. It's something to do with formatting and the way things look like they're grayed out and they aren't, and all this sort of stuff. But you have to have a notice. Beyond the notice, you have to have a policy. The policy has to list every single cookie which is active on your website. If it contains personal data, our recommendation is, even if it doesn't include personal data, list it, because it at least makes it look like you know what's on your website. It's amazing how many people go, I don't know how many cookies I've got, I don't know what they do.
Yeah.
I suppose I've got some which capture something and do something, because I often see adverts for John Lewis on the sidebar, and you're thinking, well, obviously somebody is remarketing there, aren't they? So there is an element of, well, it's two stages of compliance, and there is an element of going above and beyond the law for the policy, because it helps you in the long run as well. And it's actually easier to, I would suggest, and Michael may nod or disagree with me, but it's easier to populate something where they just say, show us everything, rather than show us some things.
Yeah. With personal data, so that might not be personally identifiable, but it is something about you, that your location, what device you're on. Is that personal, Faye?
That's a very good question. Anything which serves to identify a living individual can be deemed personal data. It could be a number of non-pieces of personal data brought together to make personal data, which is quite scary, really. So you could have, and I think this is probably where we're going in terms of both law and in terms of technology, is a situation whereby you don't give your personal data to any one person or any one thing, but traces of your non-personal data are brought together en masse in order to form your identity, or at least reverse engineer who you are. At the moment, that's fine, because it's not entirely within the remit of the law. If you're doing it on that sort of scale, which I think Michael's going to talk about in a minute, where you're using enough information to make decisions around a demographic rather than an individual, fine. If you're doing it in order to identify Katie Smith at the Avenue so you can try and sell her some more mangoes, that's probably not going to go down well. But in terms of personal data, it could be anything. IPv6 addresses are usually deemed personal data because they are attached to a device. Same with a MAC address when you're on Wi-Fi. I am now talking geek again. I apologise. But it could be...
You're in safe space. Yeah.
It could be location. It could be name. It might not be name. It's very difficult to fully set out this is what personal data is, because for every individual, something else might be personal data. John Smith is a name, but it's the name of thousands of people across this country. But if you're called Tom Chartres Moore, you're the only one called, I've Googled it to check, you're the only one called Tom Chartres Moore. So all of a sudden, my name in itself is personal data. So it can be very tricky. So that's why we tend to tell our clients to err on the side of caution, treat everything you receive from an individual as personal data, and you're unlikely to go far wrong at that point. But it does need to be considered.
So from our point of view, and why we're doing this webinar, is because we need to inform our clients and our wider community that they need to be compliant and they need to treat their users' data respectfully and within the realms of the law. But in order to make sure they don't lose a competitive advantage, it's important they don't get rid of all cookies, that instead we use some sort of mechanism, a cookie banner, to be able to collect those responsibly and according to what the user has consented to. So, Michael, let's start talking about how cookies are used from an advertising perspective and a website perspective. Why does a business need cookies?
Well, there's a variety of different things. I mean, when you think purely in an advertising frame of mind, tying your click on an ad to you making a purchase, that whole process needs cookies. Even if you go to a website and don't make a purchase, and then you see the ads following you around the internet, that all relies on cookies as well. So it's when you lose the cookies, you lose a lot of the functionality we've come to take for granted, I suppose.
And also, just from a website user interaction with a website, adding something to your cart or that useful information that can personalize your experience so that you see products you're most likely to want to buy, that can be a positive user experience. And that's something that especially millennials are saying they want, a more personal website browsing experience. So, but that's at odds with the law if that's not being collected compliantly, is that right?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, even if you think about website personalization, all of that for the large part, relies on cookies and collecting data about your browsing behavior and your demographic as well. So like I say, all of these things can be made personally identifiable, so they have to be treated with the utmost care.
And we touched on it very briefly earlier, but there's obviously a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie, and Google and Apple have talked quite a lot about third-party cookies. What's the difference between a first-party and a third-party?
So a first-party cookie is a cookie that's set by the website you're browsing, and originally that was going to be the only type of cookie that you could have set, by regulation, if you like. But as more and more technology became available, in came the third-party cookies, and that is a cookie that's set by a source that's outside of the website you're browsing. And that could be something as simple as, down the bottom of a news article, you could say, share this with your friends on Facebook, and that would come from Facebook rather than the website you're browsing. But then it also opens up more legitimate sources. So if somebody wanted to say, use your processing power to mine cryptocurrency whilst you browse the website, that would come from third-party cookies as well. So we're talking on a large spectrum of innocent to nefarious, I suppose.
And ultimately, our clients use it to make their ads work harder, as well as being able to track how much their website is selling. So let's say the cookie banner, all cookies are removed, the cookie banner, they don't need a cookie banner because they're not using cookies. What visibility are they going to lose there from a cold, hard reporting point of view?
Well, when you think that Google Analytics traditionally sets at least 3 different cookies to identify a user, if they don't have those cookies set traditionally, then they don't appear as a user in your reports. So if your users aren't being served cookies, then you have no way of determining who the people are, or how many people even you've had visit the website in a particular time period. So reporting essentially goes out the window.
And we have actually seen that in real time, where a client has moved from one website platform, say Magento 1.9 to Magento 2. As part of Magento 2, they have a built-in cookie banner that's, depending on how you've designed it, is a tiny little banner at the bottom. The user doesn't really see the banner, chooses not to interact with it, does their whole web journey, buys the product, exits the site. And as far as Google Analytics is concerned, the client's concerned, we're concerned, we've got no visibility on that user, apart from the fact that a transaction happens in their payment portal. And so then we have no idea. We've been able to previously report granularly on where this person came from. They came from Facebook, they visited 4 pages, they looked at these products, and then they purchased. That data is then all gone. So that is why we're doing this webinar, because it's important that we're compliant, but that we still get a certain amount of visibility. The notifications that we've been getting on our iPhones recently, when you go to an app or you're going to Facebook, and it says if you've got an iPhone and you're with the iOS operating system. What are these notifications about, and why is Facebook a lot in the news at the moment?
So this is a bit of an interesting one, really. Apple seem to be making a stand against user data being misused. When you think about it, a few years ago, it was all those celebrities got their personal photos leaked, and that was because their iCloud accounts got hacked. So if anything, it's a bit of a brand-saving measure, perhaps, if you want to be cynical, I suppose. Also, when you think of, the documentaries that have come out recently, Cambridge Analytica scandal, I think user privacy has become much more of a focus, and certainly there's been a larger awareness. So, of course, when you think about someone like Google or Facebook, they serve ads. What they don't want to happen is for their customers, so agencies like us that put budget through that system and generate profit for them. They don't want us moving to, say, a new ad network which guarantees privacy. They'd rather get those privacy frameworks in place themselves and keep that money rolling in.
And at the moment, the certainly within our industry, the discussion was that because the iOS 14 and 14 point, I think it's 2 or 14.5 rollout was coming, that was enhancing users' privacy and stopping Facebook cookies being automatically deployed, or Facebook Pixel being automatically deployed. We started to get less visibility on data. Is that right?
Yeah, they've had, particularly the Safari browser has had a system in place where it will delete cookies after a certain amount of time, regardless of their intentional lifespan. So if a cookie's set in your browser and it's meant to stay there all year, I think Safari would say, actually, no, 7 days is the most you get, and then it will delete it for you. With the latest version of iOS, that has now got more stricter. So when it comes to, say, a business with like a long lead time, so a long time before between first visit to purchase, maybe it's like used car website or new build houses, a life decision that's going to take a bit of thinking, not anything you just do on impulse. Those particular industries are going to be affected the most, because where you rely on remarketing and warming up that lead, if you like, over time by serving them ads on different platforms, if the cookies get deleted over a certain time, that link gets severed. So that is the main concern there. Okay.
So what technology exists for us to be able to implement a proper cookie banner and a more compliant way of managing cookies?
There's quite a few solutions on the market. Our preference is OneTrust, and they have a platform called Cookie Pro as well, Cookie Pro by OneTrust. They're very similar, but a little bit different in terms of the markets they're positioned to. The reason that we like working with those not only is because you can integrate directly with Google Tag Manager, so it's not just simply Google Tag Manager yes or no. You can actually put controls within Google Tag Manager to make it a lot more granular, a lot more controllable. But also, unlike a lot of large platforms, it will show you the proportions of users that have opted in and opted out of different categories of cookies. And that's very important, because if you don't know the proportion of users that have opted out, then of course you're not going to see them in your reporting interfaces. So it becomes a mystery. It could be 3% of users have opted out of cookies, could be 30%. You'll never know. You could look, say, compared to this time last year, what the difference is, but then you're not going to know how much of that is due to the pandemic or seasonal or some other changes to your website even. So everything is all very theoretical. However, if you know the rough proportion of users that are no longer being tracked that used to be, you can do some maths and work out roughly the missing traffic and the missing conversions from your reports.
Okay, so you've got some user cases where you've implemented OneTrust. So now there are people who are choosing not to accept cookies, as is their right, and they're given that option on arrival to the website. Roughly what percentage of opt-outs are you getting?
Ooh, that is something that gets broader the more time goes on. It could be anywhere between, say, again, 3% to 40% is usually what I see. I'd say maybe, mean average around 15%.
Okay. And one of the things that we've seen, certainly our industry, the advertising industry, change over the last couple of years is that it's being auto-optimized using machine learning. So it's using cookies basically to work out what user behavior is on the website, and then it starts to automate. I can't even say the word now. Automate some of the advertising, the bidding strategies according to the cookies that it's collecting. So if you suddenly go from having 100% cookie visibility to only 60% cookie visibility, how do you mitigate the machine then not having enough data? What are you putting in place to be able to allow the machine to bid effectively on those advertising campaigns?
That is a very good question, in fact, and you're quite right. That's something we saw originally. Cookie compliance comes in on the website, and then you see the stats start to very rapidly deteriorate because it's not getting the full amount of learning, and therefore it can't be as clever as it used to be, if you like. So Google have just brought out, well, it's in beta at the moment. It's all still a little bit of a mystery. It's called Google Consent Mode. And what that will do is, instead of a user becoming invisible if they opt out of cookies, we're able to track very basic things about them in terms of analytics, and we can certainly still track conversions to ad clicks. So not only do we get a bit of additional reporting insight, and our smart bidding solutions remain smart, if you like, but also it's done in a way that's compliant to the current regulations. So the user doesn't get any cookies set on their browser, but still information is sent over via what's called pings to the Google platforms. The other platforms, such as Microsoft Ads and even Facebook to an extent, haven't quite got a solution in place. So I get the feeling that they're very much surprised by the change in the industry that went on last year. So they may have some solutions coming out, but at the moment, nothing that we know about.
And obviously, we're now seeing GA4 appear, or Google Analytics 4, as what I assume will be a replacement to Universal Analytics. How does GA4 use events and actions to better report on the analytics of your website?
Ooh, that's quite a good question.
Is it helping us with this more kind of cookieless future that we're moving to?
So GA4, I think by design, is all very much aligned with consent mode and how things are going to go moving forwards. It relies mainly, it doesn't matter whether you hard code it on your website or deploy it through Google Tag Manager. It relies on a new script type called GTag, which is Google's own tracking method. What GTag is basically its own self-contained Google Tag Manager container, and all of the things that are run through it are in alignment with the things that can be captured with cookieless tracking.
So it's preparing us for having less visibility on cookie-based tracking and being able to then leverage it for all the different advertising types that we do.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the main selling points, if you like, for GA4 is that it has its own inbuilt machine learning for serving you recommendations or insights or anomalies. So using all of the information it does capture, even to the naked eye, it doesn't seem all that detailed compared to what we're used to in Universal Analytics. It will look for data-driven insights. So, for instance, if someone gets referred from this website instead of this website, they're now more likely to convert by 4%. So whatever you're doing there, put more activity in there. So the machine, if you like, is helping make up some of that gap that we've lost through reporting insights being muted, if you like.
Okay. So what we're realizing is that the time to bury your head in the sand has gone, that businesses can be fined, and they are being fined regularly now. So being compliant is important. And that if you then go too compliant and you're not responsibly collecting your data, you then can lose visibility, and then your ads stop working as well. So you need to approach this responsibly and also methodically to make sure the platform you use to deploy the cookies, you get the least amount of data loss as possible. Are there any top tips, Tom, that you give for businesses to approach cookie compliance? And you've got a cookie policy that you can kind of help with it, haven't you?
Yeah, we do. So we offer a lot of fixed fee package items. So we just we know what clients need, so we package it up and we deliver it as a single item for them to use. However, I would say that if you've got a website, then you need to be speaking to your website provider or your online operator. So really, Jay, they need to be speaking to you. They need to be saying, Jay, I've got this, I've got this issue. I've got cookies. I'm using cookies, because it is the business's responsibility to do something about it. They need to drive it. Even those who will come to us and say, Stephen Scown, we need to be compliant with this, we'll say, yeah, absolutely, we'll help you. But this is a three-way conversation. We need to speak to whoever is controlling and operating the cookies on your website, because they need to know what's going on as well. So my top tip is don't put your head in the sand. And I think the other end of that is don't then immediately just go and stick some compliance thing up, because as Michael said, not all of them are as good as others. They're probably over the top, or they're probably not tailored to your needs, or you might be missing something else altogether. I mean, talking about GA4 and the ability for Google to conduct dataless analytics on individuals. I mean, this is the future. This is how it's going to work, because they're going to have to circumnavigate the requirements on personal data collection. But at the same time, you're going to need to be level with your competitors in the marketplace. You're going to need to be compliant in order to get to that next stage where you start using even more information on individuals. So yeah, the package we have, it's not expensive. So for launch online customers, it's only £150. And
what
I
a
get to
bargain.
it's too cheap, if anything, Jay. It's almost like I've been caught between a rock and a hard place on cost, and someone has knocked me down. But it's £150 for launch online customers, and it tickles the ivories on everything you need, but it isn't the full suite, because you will still need to speak to, well, in that case, launch online to get it right, get it on, get it sorted, get it reviewed. And we do a review and approval process as well. That's the other thing, of course, is with cookies. People go, oh, I've done it. And they go on with their lives and go and play golf or paragliding or skiing or whatever it is their hobby is. They never go back to their website and check it, because why would you? Very few people I speak to check their own website regularly. They just assume it's there, it's fine. It's like their car or their cat. You know, if you leave it and you come back, it's usually in the same place. And websites is not always the same.
And one of the things, Michael, that we've been seeing is that it's an opportunity to go back and revisit all of the tracking, revisit what cookies are being collected. Are they all firing conversions on the same uniform events?
Yeah, quite right. In fact, what we've seen is, we do an audit of all the tracking on the website before we look to implement a cookie management tool. And we'll say to the client, what does this tracking do? So, we used that about 4 or 5 years ago. Not entirely sure why it's there. So that would be, on one hand, serving stuff you didn't even know was there, might be having an impact to your site speed, might not. The only way to tell is examine it. Another thing would be, if there's, if you're a company that's got different agencies involved, or different agencies over time that set up tracking, one might have done it in one way, might have done it in another way, and there'll be a discrepancy between the two tracking methods, which of course causes confusion, makes it harder for you to make decisions based on your data.
Yeah, so it's a great opportunity to also get ready for GA4, because if you're revisiting all of your tracking, you can make sure that you set it up ready for GA4 and have that running parallel while we go through the transition. So it's a time to kind of do some good tracking housekeeping too, I think.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, guys, I think that that after that awful start where I dipped out for a second there and missed the amazing fairy tale of Cookie Land, I just want to say thank you both. Thank you, especially Tom, because you've given up your time today to talk to our clients about why this is important. And I know your hourly rate, so I'm really grateful.
You're very welcome.
And Michael, I'm looking forward to introducing you to lots more of our clients as they tidy up their tracking and get their heads out of the sand.
Oh, very much looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. And Vicky, if you can stop live, that would be great. Cheers.